And hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Amped Up. I'm David Shuster, joined by my Blue Amp media colleagues, Melissa Corrigan and Ellie Leonard. Cliff,
Hello.
as you will notice, is not here. He's off, which is
Here.
fine. He's taking some time. Melissa and Ellie, how are you?
Great.
Very well, thank you. I think that's one of the best intros I've seen. I have to say, I just want to
Yes, a
whoever
good
made
one.
our intro is top notch.
I thought you were talking about me. No, the video. Yeah, of course, the
Okay,
video,
okay,
the
okay.
montage.
You're
Lady
good.
Liberty is still there, which
Yeah.
sometimes you
Yeah.
got to wonder. All right, let's get right into it. A lot of news. First of all, there's a story about a Washington Post journalist apparently had her house raided by the Department of Justice. Her name is Hannah Natanson. Melissa, you've been following the story. Tell us a little bit about it and what jumps out to you.
Yeah, it's alarming to me. So this Washington Post reporter had FBI agents show up to her house and take possession of her cell phone and her Garmin watch, allegedly because she would not reveal a source. So they took that into their own hands. There was a judicial warrant, which means there is a judge somewhere who thought this was an appropriate use of our federal agents to go do this. I see it as intimidation of a journalist for sure, for sure. And like I said before we went live, it is certainly alarming as someone who has broken news and who is very passionate about protecting my sources.
And she's a reporter for the Washington Post who's been working on all sorts of different things. I mean, not just sort of national security, but also sort of government efficiency and whatnot.
Right. And I saw in one article they kind of called her the government whisperer because apparently she has multiple sources within the government. And so she has a lot of news has been funneled through this person. And I guess that's why she attracted the attention.
Ellie, what's your reaction to this?
I just didn't really get, I'm probably a little more behind on this story than you guys, but I was reading through it and from all accounts, what they were saying is she wasn't really a target by the DOJ. She wasn't somebody who they were really after. Their leak that that the person they consider the leak is already behind bars, according to Pam Bondi. So I didn't really understand why she was targeted if they didn't need her for something, which is what they're claiming.
So my dealings with reporters being subpoenaed goes pretty far back. There was a case that I covered in the early 2000s involving a CIA leak case in which reporters got leaks from the Bush administration that Valerie Plame, she was a CIA operative. Her husband, Joe Wilson, had been a Bush administration critic. And the theory was that the Bush administration leaked Valerie Plame's identity. And special counsel Pat Fitzgerald, he had to go to court to actually talk to journalists. And then the courts eventually ruled that, yes, the journalists didn't have immunity. They had to testify. But that was the process. And it was, controversial at the time, the idea that the Trump administration would just willy-nilly bypass the courts, just send FBI agents into some woman's house to raid her house, to grab her electronic materials, strikes me as astounding. I mean, I would be interested, that the reporting doesn't suggest whether or not, was there a warrant? Did they have a warrant? Who was the judge who signed off on the warrant? What was the rationale? But even that seems like that should have been some sort of major court fight. Ellie.
I just think that, I think back to the first Trump administration, and we were talking about the dangers of, what journalists were going through and how they were threatened. And it just feels like child's play back then to what we're being faced with now. Especially, one thing that I take into consideration with his closeness with Russia is there's literally a Wikipedia page dedicated to all the journalists who have died mysteriously in Russia on the job. And it's like 150 different journalists during the Putin administration. And so I could call this a slippery slope. I think we're sliding. It is not there's no subtlety to what's going on. It's intimidation. He obviously doesn't want people digging. He obviously doesn't want people reporting, all the things that have changed. Like, I think of, even in the Washington Post, I think of what Jeff Bezos did to the opinion section of the Washington Post and how journalism just isn't allowed to be at this point, which is why you see a lot of people on Substack and why you see a lot of people who are no longer in the overhead, legal legacy journalism media content area anymore. We just aren't.
Now, both of you have done some pretty sensitive reporting about the Trump administration. Melissa, I'll start
Mhm.
with you. I mean, you've had a couple of stories, that big story a few weeks ago about the way that the USS Iwo Jima was essentially treated, two of the survivors of one of the early Venezuelan boat attacks. And as you reported, there was an effort, and in fact, they did they get rid of documents and files and photographs of the detainees when they were on the ship. What goes through your mind when you hear the lengths to which the Trump administration now is going after reporters? I mean, you were dealing with some very sensitive information and had to sort of worry about the identity of the sources and try to figure out
Right.
how to confirm it and all. What goes through your mind when you imagine, okay, if they're willing to go after this Washington Post reporter, they see the story about that you did that they don't like, and maybe you're next.
Right. I have to admit, when I first got that document on my phone in mid-October, that was my initial thought in my head was, you have this thing in your phone now. You have this thing. How are you going to handle this thing? And also, you have this thing in your phone. I've reported on the Navy, and I live in a Navy town. In fact, it's the largest Navy base in the world. I'm a Navy vet myself. That was definitely a consideration as well. And more concerning to me, I haven't received any blowback or any sort of suspicious anything related to that story, but I've been reporting on the flock safety case here in Norfolk, which is a federal case about the flock safety license plate reader cameras. And that's a little more concerning to me, as I've had flock drones outside my house 4 times now, and I have video footage of those those drones appearing right as I pull in my driveway. So the timing of it, the first time is a coincidence, the second time is a pattern, the third time is something intentional. And so I myself have a little more concern from the flock covering that I've done. And in fact, as you'll notice, I'm in a new background here because I got an office space for myself. I ultimately found that it was a little too concerning for me to have those drones appearing where my family lives. And so I've opted to take an office space and move all of my content, my phones, my laptops, everything that I use for reporting is now in my office. And I think that's very telling as where we're at right now in an independent media environment.
And Ellie, you've been leading the coverage of the Epstein files and some extremely sensitive information there, and somewhat, I would imagine, confusing because there are certain areas where it's redacted and there are other sources where it's not. You've got a story about that gets right into one of the greatest sensitivities the Trump couple may have, and that is Melania, and whether or not she was introduced to Donald Trump by Jeffrey Epstein or somebody else. You've got this terrific piece out there on Substack about it. I would imagine that if there are members of the Trump White House that see your stuff, they may also be calling the Department of Justice and saying, hey, better sick the FBI on Ellie Leonard. She's digging into things that the Justice Department hasn't even released yet. What goes through your mind?
Yeah. It's interesting because I was in sort of a world of journalism for about a decade where I was very much a fly on the wall. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew my face. Like you didn't know me from Adam. And not that you do now, but like I just didn't have to think about these things. I could put pictures of my kids on my social media, and it just wasn't a really big deal. And I came into this just in that a little bit of that innocent mentality. And along the way, I've had more seasoned journalists come up to me and say, hey, let's take that down, or let's be careful how I'll show a snowy scene from my neighborhood and they go, nope, you got to take that down because somebody can identify where your neighborhood is on the map. And I really didn't think about it until I wrote about the story, and I went up against the New York Times with the Ehud Barak story and how they were bringing him in to speak. And I started to think about what was I doing? I was going up against a major newspaper, but I was also going up against the former prime minister of Israel, which is, obviously dangerous territory. I flip flop in my head. I go, nobody knows who you are. You're very small potatoes. But I'm also sticking my neck out in some very big ways that are getting some attention. And I do have to be more careful. I do have to think more about these things because, same with all the Epstein files and what's going on with all of us digging into these, all of us not reporters digging into these Epstein files. We are finding things that the Trump administration didn't think anybody was ever going to see. They were hoping we would just gloss over it and off we go, and we're finding them. And so I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of the follow through and the threats, and I hope and pray that it doesn't happen to my family. I hope and pray it doesn't happen to your families, but I don't think they really will stop at anything to silence people.
I wonder if, in fact, maybe for you, Ellie, they're also, I don't know, thinking of a lawsuit. I mean, because you think about Michael Wolff also went into that sort of realm of how Melania got introduced to Donald Trump, and Melania threatened $1 billion lawsuit. I don't know if it's actually ever been filed, but it seems like part of the Donald Trump playbook is to try to intimidate people through lawfare. And for everybody who's worried, oh, Blue Amp Media, are you going to get sued? Well, we have insurance for things like that. Hopefully we don't have to use it, but that just seems to be part of the reality, right?
Right. Yeah. And Melania never did do the lawsuit. It was a threat. Trump loves to threaten lawsuits. That's part of his, brush your teeth, wash your face, threaten a lawsuit. That's part of his day. Again, that's one of those things where I've had to teach myself to be wary about, because I'm not thinking about people suing me on a daily basis. I'm thinking about getting my kids on the bus to school, right? I'm thinking about what's for dinner. And so that is something that I have to think about, but I do have, thankfully with Blue Amp, I have more protection now. But I also am, I'm also very careful, when I'm writing about Melania Trump and I'm saying all these things that are very, very eye-opening. All these things are public knowledge, but you just have to dig for them. That the same as the Epstein files or the same as Project 2025. It's all available to us, but it's made to be very hard to find. But if you look for it and you cite it, it's there and you can find it.
Melissa Corrigan and Ellie Leonard are two of our stars here at Blue Amp Media. And for everybody who's sort of wondering, oh, well, how will Blue Amp Media deal with if you get sued? I just want to make it very clear. It'll be a badge of honor. I say, bring on the lawsuit. Our attitude is very similar to one that I had when I was starting out in the news business. And I was a reporter in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we did this big investigative story on manufactured homes, or mobile homes, as you call them. And there was all sorts of corruption in the state commission. And I did this 5-part series. And by part 2, the mobile home industry, which was one of the largest advertisers on Little Rock television, pulled all their ads and threatened to do even more. And I got a call by the general manager to come to his office, and went to his office. Dale Nicholson, bless his heart, amazing guy. And he said, Shuster, I just want you to know, don't worry about them pulling the ads. We have so many people who want to advertise on this station. Fuck them. We're going to get more advertisers. And if they want to sue us, bring it on. That's a feather in our cap. And for everybody, and to me, that's the way you deal with people trying to intimidate you through lawsuits or anything else. And so, on behalf of Blue Amp Media, the Trump administration, if you're thinking about bringing a lawsuit, make our day. That would be the best thing possible for us, because it would generate more attention for us and would show, you care enough about us that you want to sue us. That's great. So now, having said that, we still have to be careful about issues of defamation and whatnot. And that's why we are very careful with how we source and do our different stories. But that's the attitude that we have here at Blue Amp Media. And so that's just putting it out there. I want to ask you both about the big news that's been coming out of Minneapolis. It was a little more than a week ago, when Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE agent. Over the weekend, there have been more incidents with innocent people being roughed up by ICE. One of the most crazy ones that I saw just yesterday was a woman who was autistic, who was driving her car through a part of Minneapolis. She was going to a doctor. There was a commotion because ICE was conducting a raid, and there were protesters who have been watching ICE. And so she essentially got bottled up in traffic. And if she's autistic, that means, there's a good chance that maybe she has sensory issues, that situations that are unusual or overwhelming to her could be really difficult. She pulls up. She's not quite sure what to do. ICE agents are yelling at her to go. Some are saying stay. And within seconds, they're literally yanking her out of the car, smashing her one of the windows, yanking her out of the car, throwing her to the ground, pushing her up then against the car, and they're arresting her for obstruction. The video it's like the ICE agents are a pack of wild animals. What did you make of this, Melissa?
It's obviously, it's just horrifying to look at. As a veteran, it really hurts your heart to see your nation's citizens being treated in a way that we were prohibited from treating anyone overseas. I myself was not in theater in Iraq, but I have a lot of friends and peers that were. And, they've said countless times over the past week, we were not allowed to treat civilians in Baghdad this way. It was absolutely, we would have would have been discharged for treating people this way. So seeing American citizens treated this way obviously is just an affront to the senses. It's an affront to our dignity as a people. And I think it's a real wake up call. I know my community, my city here in Norfolk has definitely organized a lot of meetings over the past week and the coming week to discuss coming together as a community to make some plans and some contingency plans with one another outside of the city, outside of the local government, just neighbor to neighbor, starting to establish some mutual aid networks and some community aid networks to protect not only our immigrant citizens of Norfolk, of which we have quite a large population, but all the rest of us as well. I mean, at this point, it's not about immigrant or not. It's very clear that every single human being that is not wearing an ICE vest is target.
And the targets are also going, every single person, never mind, it's just migrants, but protesters, demonstrators, journalists. I was struck in this video that, while they're yanking this woman out of the car, another couple of ICE agents are going to the reporters, the photographers, and literally trying to block them from taking pictures. And it used to be the case. I mean, I thought over the past couple of years that police departments, Ellie, had made some progress since George Floyd, that a lot of police departments have been educated on constitutional rights and de-escalation. But ICE, it seems like they don't care whatsoever about trampling on the Constitution, throwing out your civil rights, throwing out your First Amendment rights. And on top of, the images that we've seen, there's some reporting now that the Trump administration is not only doubling down on this, but they're surging even more ICE agents into Minneapolis as a show of force to say, okay, we're going to go after the protesters too now, even more aggressively.
I think it's really interesting because, good old Minneapolis, people keep saying, why does this keep happening to them? And it's because they don't put up with shit. This happens a lot of places and we'll never hear about it, but Minnesota will not put up with this. And it is ironic because when we were talking about, Black Lives Matter and back then, and people were talking about how to revamp police departments and how we approach especially mentally ill people and the idea of bringing social workers on the grounds with a police officer to de-escalate situations and have a more gentler approach so that you have less violent interactions. We went completely in the opposite direction. Like this is twice as bad as it ever was. And I just find that just so ironic because it's just like, so many of these conversations that we were just starting to have, like you think of Me Too, you think of Black Lives Matter, you think of all these things that we were just starting to have. Trump was like, nope, we're going in the exact opposite direction. And so here we are, I have had Substackers in my DMs saying, can you help? I have a sister, a brother, a mother in Minneapolis. They're being removed from their home because their landlord is Somali or their landlord is Haitian or, and they're terrified and they're removing their posts because they're afraid for their family members. Like I've had people in my DMs terrified asking me what to do. And I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell them other than go online, figure out what your rights are, talk to a lawyer. You do not have to get out of your car. You can ask them if you're being arrested. If you're not being arrested, you may leave. As long as you leave safely, you are allowed to leave. And people are just terrified. They're just terrified.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that, we go back to the rights messaging and their ability to flood the zone with their version of the narrative. And the conversation about defund the police began a decade ago. And of course, we did not mean pull all money out of police departments. Right. We meant to reallocate resources with community partners who will come alongside police. Like you mentioned, having a social worker come out if there's a mentally ill person. And in my city, we began doing some work right around the corner from my house. We built a community care office right next to a police department. And so the idea was eventually that these would work hand in hand, that when a police officer was dispatched to a mental health situation, that somebody from the community care center would go with them and to begin down that road. And unfortunately, it seems in my city, those efforts have been abandoned. That is not a program that has come to fruition. And I think the rights grabbing of that narrative of defund the police. They want to take money away from police officers. They want to get rid of the police altogether. This presents yet another opportunity for the left to flood the zone with accurate information and to accurately define the phrase defund the police, and to point out in situations like what happened in Minnesota yesterday with the autistic woman having a community care partner there versus these iced up, masked up thugs, would have resulted in an entirely different outcome.
Yeah. Over the last couple of years since George Floyd, I've done a lot of work with and reported on those First Amendment auditors. These are the people who go up and film police, and the police, if they get angry, then the auditor says, and the police ask for ID. They say, I don't have to give you my ID. And these are people who clearly know the law. And through a lot of these videos and through a lot of the various First Amendment auditors, the term reasonable articulable suspicion has sort of become more familiar to a lot of folks. And it's this idea that if police stop you, they can ask you for an ID and they can ask you to get out of your car, but unless they have reasonable articulable suspicion that you have committed crime or about to commit a crime, you don't have to provide ID. And so there are a lot of people out there who are very well educated about this. I was just talking to an auditor the other day who says that there's no way in hell he's going to try to audit ICE because he's seen how reckless they are, that this isn't just a couple of bad eggs who don't understand the Constitution and don't follow the law. This is institutional. And to me, what was, the most frustrating and saddest thing about the Renee Good killing last week, and again, I think in every police department, in every industry, media, music, there's always going to be bad apples. There's always going to be one or two people who don't know what they're doing and get caught in a situation, and terrible things happen. But where it became institutional to me was very quickly when there was Kristi Noem and the Tricia McLaughlin, the Department of Homeland Security spokesperson, calling this a domestic terrorist. And then there's J.D. Vance the next day saying that the ICE agent has absolute immunity, which doesn't exist in this country.
No.
It's called qualified immunity. To me, then it's like, they're basically now giving the green light to anybody who's an ICE to do whatever the hell that they want, that this is institutional. Be aggressive, beat the crap out of people. Don't worry about the Constitution. We've got your back. And to me, that was just horrifying.
I think this is the route we've taken since Kyle Rittenhouse. That's all I could think about when I just thought I saw people who are probably untrained. I have tried to FOIA their training materials. They are not willing to send them. We're seeing people do things that I'm guessing there is no training for, and they have no regulations on. They shoot first, they ask questions later. They have great lawyers. They're willing to be pardoned and backed up. I feel like that the idea of that vigilante justice from the right came from Kyle Rittenhouse. I feel like that was a starting point for that, where you can get away with anything. That is shooting someone in the head on Fifth Avenue and getting away with it. That's what Trump's been saying the whole time. And I think that's where we are. There are not rules. There are shoot first, ask questions later.
And I would say maybe even worse than that, because at least Kyle Rittenhouse was charged and had to go through a trial, and then he was found not guilty. In this particular case, again, the FBI is still digging in, refusing to provide any of the forensic evidence or any information collected at the scene to local and state investigative authorities. And so it seems like the FBI, just like what they've done with the Epstein files, they're shielding things, they're hiding it, and trying to make sure that people can't learn what the truth is. And the truth.
Well,
Go ahead.
I think it's interesting that you said you FOIA'd the training materials and they don't want to. They gave us a lot of breadcrumbs in the past couple of weeks about how these agents are being trained. Kristi Noem immediately came out and said that officer did exactly as he was trained to do. That's one breadcrumb. So you're essentially telling us that you're training people these agents to shoot people on site. Okay. And then the other issue that I see happening, you cannot go on social media, particularly TikTok or Instagram Reels, without hitting a video from Minnesota of agents using what we call the death box, where they box in a car with 3 vehicles on 3 sides of that vehicle, and then they jump out and they yell conflicting commands at the driver. So essentially, whatever the driver does is wrong because they're disobeying one of the commands. All of that is aside from the fact that ICE is not authorized to do traffic stops. That's not part of their purview. But the fact that we are seeing multiple videos of the same strategy, the death box strategy using vehicles, I would love to see their training, but because it appears that they are being trained just not in any way that they've previously been trained through a federal agency.
That's such a great point. It reminds me that, a number of people pointed out that even within the ICE protocols, the idea that ICE agents would put themselves in front of somebody's vehicle, deliberately put them in front of somebody's vehicle, or deliberately smash into somebody in order to get somebody, that even goes against their own sort of protocols. I wanted to ask you both, though, about, there's some polling out there now that suggests that I think it's I don't know if it's a majority, but a plurality, something like 47-48% of the American public want ICE disbanded. And I think it's like 41% that say, no, keep it. And even the Minneapolis, Minnesota Mayor Jacob Frey said he doesn't want it disbanded. He just wants it reformed. But the way that the public is viewing this now, even though, with poll after poll showing most Americans disagree with the deportation policies, a plurality now want ICE disbanded. Even Donald Trump, some of his biggest, podcasting supporters, Joe Rogan, comparing ICE to Gestapo. Does it give any of you some at least hope, or make you, lessen the sting of all this, with the sense that maybe the American public is sort of moving and coming around on this? Ellie, you first.
Yes, I'm always hopeful. I'm a very glass half full person that we're changing, that people's eyes are becoming open, that we're all not just soldiers to a political party, but we pay attention, we do our homework. I would say, in the case of disbanding ICE, I would say go back to 2003 when they were formed and see what the original statutes were, what the original training was, what the original intent was, and go from there. Because if they can have a purposeful enforcement that isn't pulling people out of their homes who have done nothing illegal, like being undocumented is not illegal. It's just undocumented. Like if you're after people who have committed actual murderous crimes, then fine, document it, show us, go through the regulations. But like what's happening now is like the Gestapo pulling people off the street. I was watching something today where they were saying, I think it was in Minneapolis, they were talking about, they had a small rural school, elementary school. It only had something like 300, 400 students, and 125 students did not come to school because ICE was circling the parking lot. And when the ICE were asked to leave, because legally they cannot be in a school parking lot, they camped out on the sidewalk across the street, which was a public sidewalk. So, when you have people who are afraid to go to work, who are afraid to go to school, that's not law enforcement. That's not what law enforcement in this country was meant to be. That is not the home of the brave and the free and bringing all your part. Like I find it so ironic that we are approaching the 250th anniversary of this country, because we are so far gone from the original intent of everything that was described when we created this country. And that is a huge part of it. We're saying no more. Get out of our country. We don't want you. And it's the opposite.
Related to this, I've been watching the Ken Burns series about the American Revolution. Yes. I don't know if either of you have seen it. And so I keep going back to sort of the colonists and how angry the sort of rage developed to the point where they were like, okay, we're gonna take out the British. We're gonna ambush them. Right. And it feels like, I don't think there's, obviously there's some very clear differences between what's going on with the colonists and what's happening now. But I sense that same sort of rage, that sort of angst about government overreach, and the expression, whether it's, people are expressing it in terms of polls of wanting ICE defunded, or whether it's podcasters, I still feel that, the American people are slowly sort of waking up to our heritage from 250 years ago and making the connection and realizing, this isn't acceptable in the United States. And I had a friend say the other day, well, in a way, we can see how much better we have it than, say, Iran. Because in Iran, they're just, shooting people by the thousands on the streets. And yeah, that's true in terms of, global comparison between the United States and Iran. We're a lot safer still with ICE than we would be with the security forces in Iran. But America was founded differently, right? We've had this heritage for 250 years about not having people quartered in our homes and military taking advantage of us. And we have certain inalienable rights. And so just by that standard, it doesn't give me great satisfaction to know, well, we're not Iran. Melissa.
Right. Well, I wrote a piece. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that what I love most about Ken Burns' piece is he is not shying away from addressing the original sin of slavery. He is exposing the ways that slavery was deeply embedded in the foundation and the creation of this nation in ways that have not been done through traditional historic textbooks that have been provided to public school kids. I'm definitely learning a lot through watching that series. And it's, as it ties in, we are not seeing the same level of rage from these ICE officers directed at Caucasian appearing immigrants. We're not seeing the same rage at Swedish immigrants and British immigrants and Canadian immigrants. It is
Right.
it is so focused on skin color and skin tone. And and now we're seeing absolutely unabashed references from the Department of Homeland Security, from the Department of Labor on their socials, direct references to Nazi and white supremacist content, materials, songs, imagery. They're not hiding this at all. So what I like to think is that this is the last screaming, dying vestiges of white supremacy. And I do believe that the majority of America is not behind the idea of a white supremacist society, of a completely white society. That's absurd. That's not going to happen. And so what we see is the extinction burst concept of this is a small subspecies of Americans that's dying out, that's being forced out. And with their dying wails, they're going to be loud and they're going to be violent and they're going to be aggressive, but they are not the majority. They are the minority. And I do think in time, that even those on the far right are going to see, unfortunately, I do think it's going to take them being impacted personally in some way, whether it's economically, whether it's someone in their direct circle being impacted by these immigration raids. But to go back to your point about ICE being disbanded, ICE didn't exist. ICE didn't exist 25 years ago. At the turn of the century,
the Immigration and Naturalization Service, I think, INS, right?
Yes.
And so as somebody who went and enlisted and served my country and buried some of my friends under false pretenses, I say that this agency was formed under false pretenses. It was formed under the same pretenses of the Patriot Act, as the weapons of mass destruction that caused us to go destroy an entire culture of people. And the same people who 5 years ago said that masking and missing school were signs of tyranny are now only masking and causing children to miss school. They're massive hypocrites. They're not being Christian. There's plenty of good Christian people that are rising up and saying that you don't represent me. This version of whatever this Christian nationalism is not the work of Jesus. It's not from the gospel. And as long as we have those quiet, good soldiers stepping up out of their ethics, out of their morals, I think we're going to prevail in the end.
And such an interesting point to connect it to the faulty intelligence that led us into the Iraq War some 23 years ago. And it feels like then, Dick Cheney, George W. Bush were absolutely convinced that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and they cherry-picked intelligence to be able to make the case to the American people that we had to go into Iraq. In this particular instance, Donald Trump in his campaign said, well, we're going to have to do these deportations because we have all these hoodlums, these people from mental asylums, these criminals, these gangs who have flooded into the United States. And even though that intelligence has already been debunked in part, I think there's a New York Times piece about Tren de Aragua back in March and April that debunked the idea that Venezuela had sent thousands of gang members. But even putting that aside, for Americans who do want the criminals, the really bad people to be deported, the government's own statistics show that it's only like 10 to 15% of everybody being swept up has ever even been charged with a violent crime. So, Ellie, Americans.
Well,
you're not seeing the rapists.
Right.
Maybe there's some of them that are being swept up, but for the most part, these are just our neighbors and our friends and people who go to our schools and work in our communities who are paying taxes, who suddenly are being swept up because they look Latino or have a Latino name.
I live in a community where people have 4 generations under one roof. Like we are one of the, I think, 2 white families at our bus stop. If you go to a school in a classroom, you will probably have 3 white children, and the rest are from everywhere you can imagine. We have a very diverse town, and people are afraid, and there are dog whistles on our Facebook community group pages. And I wrote a piece back, it feels like 100 years now. It was right after Trump was elected, and I equated what was going on with immigration to the story of Corrie ten Boom, who, if you've ever read her books, her family was not Jewish, but they hid Jewish families during the Holocaust in their clock shop. And in so doing, I did a lot of research about the statistics of how many people of those 11 million, that 11 million number that we've heard over and over again of undocumented immigrants in the US, what is the statistic of people who actually have a criminal record? And that includes unpaid parking tickets. These are very, very small crimes, but I included everything, and it is 4%. 4% of undocumented immigrants have some kind of a criminal record in the US. If you want to think about what percentage of US citizens have a criminal record of any kind, including unpaid parking tickets, it is 33%. So we're not being threatened by undocumented immigrants in this country. And when you see something on the news where they say, oh, an undocumented immigrant, has murdered someone or has run someone over with their car, that is a targeted news campaign, because when you hear that, there are 10 citizens over here who have committed violent crimes in the same area that you will not be hearing about. They will focus in on the immigrant, and that's purposeful. That is from the Trump administration, so that we fear immigrants, so that we fear that they are raping and murdering our children, bringing drugs into this country. Like, it's really, really, really frustrating, because the statistics are so clear. You can back them up. You can look at them in multiple sources that are cited, that there only 4% have any kind of a record at all. And even those, the majority of that is nonviolent crimes.
I want to just pause for a second to acknowledge everybody who's watching us live streaming right now. You are watching a special edition of Blue Amp Media. I'm David Shuster, joined by Melissa Corrigan and Ellie Leonard. And if you think these two are smart, you should see the stuff they've written if you haven't already. It is brilliant. And so for everybody who is supporting Ellie Leonard at the Panicked Writer, or Melissa Corrigan at Blue Amp Media, thank you. But if you haven't subscribed yet to Blue Amp Media or to Ellie or to Blue Amp Media, do so now, because there's so much more material than just these shows. There are columns, there's a whole catalog of stuff that people have been writing about, and it is brilliant. And Blue Amp Media is a little bit different from some of the other progressive media organizations that may be talking nonstop about Donald Trump, and that's fine, but there's some real investigative journalism going through documents, some real investigative reporting that is happening at Blue Amp Media that we talk about on these shows, but we literally publish analysis and remarkable stuff every day. So just kudos to our audience who's subscribing, and thank you in advance to everybody who chooses to subscribe today, or even better, chooses to be a paid subscriber. We appreciate that, because that helps us do even more of this sort of work. I want to ask both of you, because you were talking about the deportations and the inherent white supremacy and racism the Trump administration is engaged in. The thing that I still struggle with is why? Like, what does the Trump administration gain? They're never going to be able to get rid of all the migrants who are here. They're probably not even going to be able to get most of the violent ones, either the 4% or whatever it is. And it feels like the political damage they are causing, again, whether it's polling, whether it's moderates and centrists who are horrified, it feels like that political damage is going to be significant. So, Ellie, you first. What do you think? What do you think motivates? Never mind Donald Trump, because he's got his own sort of maybe perverse view of all this, but like Stephen Miller and the rest, the people who are carrying this out, what motivates them to just cast aside the Constitution, throw away due process, and send thousands of ICE agents into a place like Minnesota to essentially endanger public safety?
I think it's really hard to separate them from Donald Trump, because I think they're all of the same mind. There's a lot of racism at the top right now, and we've seen that in Donald Trump and his history and the Central Park Five and all the stuff that he's done with casinos and Native American tribes, and these are his people. This is his circle. You don't see a lot of diversity, and when you do, it's very strange about the things coming out of someone like JD Vance's mouth about immigration, or Kash Patel's mouth about immigration, when like it doesn't make sense when people step out and say, I choose to hurt myself and my own family for the sake of of this regime. It's just inherent racism. That's all we're dealing with, and greed and money, and I mean, this goes back to when you look at the Epstein files too. Like, you don't see a lot of diversity in the Epstein files either. When you start to talk about money and greed and corporation and getting what you want, and all these CEOs at the inauguration day, you're not seeing diversity and thinking about families from other countries and thinking about immigration. You're seeing a bunch of white wealthy billionaires who want to maintain their white wealthy billionaireism, which is not a word, but like that's all they care about. And they, this is something that I've said a lot lately to my own family. It's that idea of you put on your own oxygen mask first and then you help someone else. That only applies to planes. That is on airplanes. That is not real life. Like, help the person next to you and then help yourself. And I think people have forgotten how to do that. They've forgotten how to walk in other people's shoes. And the more money you have and the more power you have, that just keeps getting whittled and whittled and whittled away. And not that these people started out real great. You can look at video of Stephen Miller in high school. Like, he's never had his feet on the ground as a sound and kind and good person. But I think handing them all the power without restraint and without restriction obviously worsens that tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold.
Melissa, what do you think is driving the Trump administration?
Well, I think that they are attempting to dog whistle to their base, but I think they grossly overestimate the volume of their base. I think they believe that there are these latent cells of white militia that are just ready to be activated. And we're seeing that that's not the case. We're seeing that ICE has now had to leave cities due to court order. National Guard has had to leave cities due to court orders. And there's no militia coming over the bend, right? There's no homegrown white supremacist soldiers coming to back them up. And I believe a lot of what they're doing, these obvious, the imagery, the signs, the songs, the speeches, I think they are attempting to call out to this base that they believe that they have. And that base doesn't really exist in the volume they think it does. I think back to right after Hurricane Helene. I'm from the Western North Carolina area, and I assisted with some rescue efforts and some work down in that region at the time. And if you remember, as FEMA began coming in and going door to door, there was some hostility among the Appalachian people, especially those in very remote regions. And once or twice, a FEMA agent got a gun pulled on them when they stepped on someone's property. That's the extent that Appalachia does not trust the federal government, and they have good reason not to. But what I learned out of that, because in some of the group chats I was in, some of the Signal chats and things like that, a few people began mentioning these militias. They mentioned that, oh, you don't know what's coming for you. We're training. We're preparing. Nothing ever came of it. No bands of men, trained, organized men came marching out of the Appalachian Mountains. It doesn't exist. 2 or 3 people in that area had these delusional beliefs and stockpiles of guns, and they believe that they're part of some greater white supremacist militia. It just doesn't exist. So I think a lot of what they're doing, these really grotesque, over-the-top white supremacist references and comments, are calling out to those people, and they're kind of just echoing. There's nobody responding. They may respond in a Reddit thread or a Twitter thread, but they're not coming up in real life. And I would also, to add to that, if you're having to pay millions of bots on a bot farm to repeat your message, there's nothing there. There's no substance there. There's no people behind it, because people with real movements don't have to pay bots to repeat their message.
And to try to appeal to their movement or whatever existed of their movement
Right.
for the last several years, there was the Epstein files and this idea that there was an international global pedophilia ring, mostly involving Democrats, and they got the MAGA crowd and the QAnon crowd so revved up over this that essentially they dug their own grave, so that when the Epstein files finally are available, and oops, it looks like there are a lot of connections because Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were the best of friends for more than a decade. And that's not something most people in QAnon or MAGA world really understood, perhaps until recently. Ellie, in terms of the Epstein files, and there's more documents apparently from New York that have been given the Department of Justice that they're sifting through. Is it something like less than 1% of the documents and files in the Department of Justice possession that have been released so far?
I mean, the number keeps changing. And what I have to remind people is a document is not a single page. A document could be 10 pages, 20 pages, 30 pages. So when you hear 1 million documents, that's a lot of paperwork. It's not 1 million pieces of paper. So I don't know. I don't know what percentage we have. It keeps changing as I'm reading when I'm reading these FBI emails, because a lot of what's in the documents right now are like these FBI emails that are banter back and forth prior and post arrest of Epstein. The information that they got was messy. It was unorganized. Things were getting lost. CDs of information were disappearing, and they kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger numbers. And they said, when are we going to get those? I hear there's 1 million files that we need to dig through. When are we going to have time to do that? So they've known about this for a very long time, and there was no organization with it. There was no prep for it. They dumped it in the DOJ, and the DOJ just sat on it and did nothing with it for the longest time, and then claimed it didn't exist.
Have you seen any pattern with what the DOJ has released so far? In other words, certain types of documents that are, that maybe they have sort of organized the way that the DOJ is internally trying to sort of scrub these, the way that they are approaching this. Is there any sort of method to the madness of how it's being released or how the DOJ is tackling it?
There's probably a pyramid system of people that Donald Trump likes the least versus likes the most. And we're going to see the people he likes the least more prominently in the files that we get first. So, we did get a lot of Bill Gates stuff. We got a lot of Bill Clinton stuff. And not to say that in any of those files have they shown that they've done anything illegal, but they're just very prominent. There's a lot of pictures of them. There's a lot of emails about them. There's a lot of discussion of Melinda Gates. I think she's a powerhouse. Throughout, she said, do not hang out with this guy. He's not good news. And Bill Gates did not listen. I think we're going to get all of that. And if and when we get to see Donald Trump, it will be the last stragglers, because that is the thing that they are protecting the most.
And Melissa, there's been a lot of expectation, anticipation about, photographs and videos and as to Ellie's point, the only real sort of photographs we've seen so far mostly involve, Bill Clinton, some of the Bill Clinton photographs of him being in a swimming pool with Ghislaine Maxwell. How's it playing where you are, Melissa? Because I know, like here in Connecticut, about 2 months ago, we started seeing on a lot of the overpasses and on some of the telephone poles, people started putting up the signs that said, release the Epstein files. And it's become very sort of much part of the conversation that this stuff is being hidden, that it's being kept from the American people, and that there's a reason why it's being hidden. And so a lot of people are, okay, this is, the consciousness of guilt is there from Donald Trump because of how his Department of Justice is handling this. Is it breaking through in, Norfolk, Virginia, where you are?
Oh yeah, I am in the big Navy Reddit thread, and anytime someone posts anything remotely, even quasi complimentary towards the president or anything like that, one of the top comments, this is from active duty Navy people, is, yeah, but where's the Epstein files? So even among the military, there is a keen awareness that a lot of other things are being done to distract from the Epstein files, to take attention away from it. And it heartens me so greatly to see active duty military people saying, yeah, but where's the Epstein files? So the military is not lost.
And Ellie, out of the files that have been released so far and all the stuff you've reported on, what has surprised you the most?
Probably just the not offline because they were emailing, but the interactions, the letters, the emails, when the things that nobody thought was ever going to be, brought to light. I've gone through and categorized them because they're all out of order. There's nothing that's in order in these files. So if you have 10 emails, they will be spread over 100,000 documents and they will be out of order chronologically. Then that's probably purposeful on some level, but I've been going through and I've been categorizing all the email threads so that we can see the conversations with Steve Bannon and Epstein. We can see the conversations with Ehud Barak and Epstein, or Woody, talking about Woody Allen, because Woody Allen didn't email, but like even emailing his wife Soon Yi. Like there's a lot of very strange and inappropriate and like unacademic conversations with very academic people. Like you think Larry Summers and like, did you think she liked me? Do you think she's gonna call? Like just really just dumb conversations between these really prominent people. And I feel like that is where we're gonna start to see the meat of all of this. There's Easter eggs, I have to say, like I have in my Substack community, I have really reached out to people and said, you know what, there's nothing that I'm doing that you can't do. Like I am not qualified for any of this. Here are the files. Let's all do through them together. And they start to find things and they say, hey, what'd you think of this? And what did you see this? And so we found a few things that way. And it's really great to work together as a community, because I firmly believe that we wouldn't have a single one of these files except for us, meaning like the people on this side of the government. If we had not been screaming from the rooftops and digging through these files, Congress wouldn't be pushing for them to come out. They're doing what Congress should be doing. They're doing our bidding. We are telling them release the files. They're fighting to release the files, some of them, and we're getting them. But if we hadn't made a stink about this, we wouldn't have seen anything.
I love that point about the community efforts to do the research and to dig through the documents and sort of spread it out so that everybody has an opportunity to see what's going on. The other story I want to bring up, and this gets Melissa to something that's sort of in your sweet spot, and that is Venezuela. And also Greenland, for that matter. I mean, there are meetings on this day between Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and J.D. Vance and officials in Greenland. And apparently it seems like the Trump administration is trying to buy off Greenland, basically saying, we'll give each of your residents $100,000. Otherwise, we're going to invade Greenland.
We can't get universal health care.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Is there what are you picking up from your friends in the military about first Greenland and then Venezuela?
They're pissed. I think we're going to see a massive recruiting crisis in about 4 to 6 years when these people's contracts expire. It's not looking good. There's not anybody who's willing to continue serving. I don't care what the pension is. I don't care what the retirement looks like, because then you see like Mark Kelly, that your retirement isn't even, secure if you speak out against this regime. So do you think these young men are going to give 20 years of their life to then not know if they get their retirement or have it yanked back out from under them? I think that a lot of what's happened in the past 3 weeks has proved two things: that they have grossly overestimated their support, and they have grossly underestimated the American people.
I think that's a great point. And what about Venezuela? Same issue with Venezuela. I mean, it seems like Donald Trump has no plan. It's just to get rid of Maduro and then hope that everything comes together.
Yeah, I've seen more comments than I can count of, I am not going to fight for oil. I'm not going to fight for some billionaire. I am not. This is not what I signed up for. I saw the Lincoln Project, I believe, reported on the sheer volume of calls made to the GI Rights Hotline, to the Orders Project, from the theater, from the Caribbean Sea. These guys on the ship are calling and saying, I don't want to do this. I didn't want to do this. There's now reports that someone contacted legal advice prior to the first boat strike. So these military guys are aware that things are happening and being ordered that are not lawful, and they're not with it. They're not going to give a 20-year devoted career to a military that uses them to commit unlawful orders, which in any number of months or years, they may be called to task for, and they may have to face judicial proceedings based on following an order. And this is an enlightened military force. They know their rights. The public has been very good about screaming their rights at them, their right to not obey an unlawful order. And I think that message is getting through, and they're feeling more and more empowered by the day to say no.
And Ellie, in your circle of friends and family, the issues of Greenland and Venezuela, how's it playing?
I just think that it's a clear indication that people have done a lot of reading of history. Greenland is 90% indigenous, and we're coming in and we're saying we're taking over your country. And it's like, even if you're the most right-wing Republican out there, like, that's a familiar story. That should be a really familiar story to all of us in the United States of America, taking over indigenous land and controlling it as colonialism. And that's the biggest thing that I've thought about. We have a lot of also Venezuelan community here, teachers that we checked in with the day after the invasion. People are uncomfortable, to say the least. They don't know what's happening. They didn't like Maduro, but they don't know what's happening. And I don't think anybody wants Donald Trump to come in and take over any more countries. I think that's probably the bottom line.
I want to change gears a little bit here at the end. And as all of our viewers can probably tell, Ellie and Melissa are superstars. And as modest as they are Substack superstars already. And for those of us who have young girls, 12-year-olds who talk about wanting to get into journalism and be the next Melissa Corrigan or Ellie Leonard, what advice do you give, kids and people in high school and people who think about, well, maybe I do want to serve the greater good by telling stories and reporting out news and information? Melissa, you start. What advice do you give younger people who want to sort of do this, or even people who have had another career, who have been in the military or aviation or whatever it is? You just say, you know what, this is something I want to do. I want to start writing and reporting. What advice do you give them?
I would say absolutely chase that dream. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a reporter, and my grandfather had an old fedora, and I wrote press on an index card, stuck it in the hat, and I interviewed people at the local farmers market and wrote a little story about it. And then when I got to be an adult, I somehow thought that this was too illustrious, too complicated, too I don't know. I thought that I could not do it. And I would encourage anyone to just get that thought out of your mind, because the last year of my life has been the most exciting, the most fun, the most rewarding, the most fulfilling. And I wish I had done it earlier. But one thing I will say is that people coming to this field later in life have such invaluable life experiences. I would not be able to report on the military without having a military background. I would not be able to report on a lot of the other issues that I report on in counter story media, like adoption, without my personal life experiences. So don't let age or anything like that stop you, because it's never too late to start a new career, a new path, and your life experiences will give you such valuable insight that others may not have.
So well said. Ellie.
You know what? I think for me, because I also have a teenage daughter who is a good writer. And I think for me, it's that idea of citizen journalism and knowing how to relay information accurately, and teaching my kids, especially in a time when they're all being taught how to do their research with AI and ChatGPT and all these things, how to accurately vet the things you discover online. If your friends are talking about something, you hear about something on YouTube, how to pass along that information truthfully and get to the bottom of things, versus I saw something, I saw a screenshot, I saw a meme, I saw a photo, and I passed it along, and look at this crazy story, and oh my goodness. And I think that's where we start, because that's something that all of us can do. And I think that's the times that we're living in, is there's a lot more of citizen journalism than there is of legacy journalism these days. And so just teaching our kids how to do their homework, how to discover information, and how to pass it along safely and appropriately and accurately.
I would agree with both of you. And I would sort of add to that the critical thinking skills. They're not only important, for those of us who are in the business or have Substacks or YouTubes, whatever it is, or try to do journalism, but it's perhaps even more important for the audience, for people who are news consumers. And look, there are a lot of people out there who don't want to be bothered reading the news. They just want to do their thing. And that's fine. I mean, you have that right in America. But for everybody who wants to try to make sense of the world around us, whether it's our local community, our state, our nation, our world, having critical thinking skills to be able to sort through all of this information is perhaps even more valuable and important than it was just 10 or 15 years ago. So with that, we are, believe it or not, we're at the end of this hour. I just want to remind everybody, subscribe to Blue Amp Media, subscribe to The Panicked Writer. You are going to see so much great stuff, I promise everybody, coming from Ellie and Melissa and Lawrence and Dana and everybody else, and Cliff and I. 2026 is going to be a remarkable year for Blue Amp Media. And to all of you who have been with us, for several months, thank you. To all of us who are joining now, thank you even more. And to everybody who's just discovering us, trust me, the names Ellie Leonard and Melissa Corrigan, they're going to be at the tip of your tongue in 2026 throughout the year, I promise you. And we're all going to be better for it. So anyway, Melissa and Ellie, thanks for doing this. Appreciate this. Was a great show.
Thank you so much, David.
So much fun to be on with you guys. And I promised everybody next time we have them on, we'll get into maybe more of the personal stuff or some of the silly stuff, because they're actually both very interesting personalities as well. So that's it. On behalf of Cliff Shuster and the entire team of Media, I'm David Shuster. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye-bye.